Hello everyone, Tony here. It's hard to believe, but Dwayne and I started this podcast almost 1 year ago. To date, we have published over 30 episodes, have had the show downloaded over 1,200 times, and have reached 8 different countries. Through it all, we've had a great time, telling and hearing stories and diving deep into the world of human forestry. As with many projects like this, it starts as a totally different idea and morphs itself into its own entity. TreeActions has grown and will continue to. Dwayne and I are always looking for new ways to connect and grow the community. We have opened a Patreon page which can be found by searching for TreeActions on the Patreon website or app. A link is also posted in the show notes. Recording, producing, and publishing a podcast does not come free. And while this is truly a labor of love, and access to the podcast will always be free, we wanted to develop a way for those of you who wish to support the show to do so. For those that support the show through Patreon, you will get access to the episodes a week earlier and be able to comment should you choose. In the future, we develop more content available only on Patreon. I want to thank you all for listening, and for all of you who have reached out to express your appreciation for the show. It really does mean the world to us.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Season 2 of TreeActions, the Human Forestry Podcast. And on this episode, it's just Dwayne Newsteader and Tony Tressel. And we thought we would just take time to reflect on year one and, just that, reflect on year one.
Yeah, it's always important to take time to look back at the things you've done, the projects you've done, you've completed, what you could do better, what you would make different, what do you want to move in the future. And, it's the Aristotle quote, right? Like a life unexamined is not worth living. So the idea with this podcast was to take what it's meant, talk a little bit about, why the podcast started and then what it's turned into, because it's turned into something very different than what I think I had envisioned or expected, or I don't know, I didn't come into this with these big grand plans, but at the same point, what it's turned into, and I'm very pleased with what it's turned into, is really beyond any of my expectations.
I would agree. If I think back, it was the aftermath of a Arbor Canada training event where I realized, we've been in business for 25 years plus now, and that we had, going back to the beginning instructors, the first instructors that were ever full-time with the organization, and we've routinely had, get-togethers, but, it's been long enough now that there's instructors that are with us now that never even knew those instructors before, and it was a way to just connect to keep the legacy alive, I guess you could say, or to provide some venue to keep a connection between the past and the present. Not just to focus on the history, but to focus on where we've come from and where we are now. Kind of like what happened, what it was like, and what it's like today. And that's why the first episode was Norm, who was our very first instructor. And, it was in that podcast where, and he reflected, and that was the first time Don Blair was mentioned of many times as a key person in people's development of arboriculture, or as arborists, and it very quickly turned into kind of almost a history overview of arboriculture in a way, with this human forestry problem of how trees have connected or helped us all individually as persons and as people, living life while, making our living doing trees or something to do with trees, but yet living the life everyone else lives, which is family, friends, and joys and struggles and milestones and whatever, right? And really expanding my thinking into what trees are, the example that trees are, I think, of what it's like and of what living life is like. And what's fascinating to me, I was recently talking with a niece of mine who does a lot of spiritual healing type work, and she made a reference to trees. And I told her about the podcast. In fact, I'm considering that. I think she'd make a great guest. But we got talking about trees, the forest trees, but then also the urban forest trees, and there's almost even more or as much kinship with trees in the urban forest as trees in the human forest, because the challenges that trees face, are like some of us that have grown up with challenges, and the challenges urban trees face much different than, and if you grew up in a family where there was a lot of support, a lot of network, siblings, aunts, uncles, you maybe your life was more forestry like, more like the natural forest. But for some, I was adopted, and my beginnings was kind of like in a nursery, literally, and I was an individual. I wasn't part of a collective until months later, where I joined a family and started that journey in a different way. And how that, and how that even affects how trees shape and grow. An open growing tree growing somewhat as an individual or planted that way as specimen has a totally different form and structure than the same tree would have in the forest. And just another way of looking at it. And we've tried to draw that out. I've tried to draw it out in our sessions, as far as how people relate to how trees have affected them professionally, and how we've been directly connected to trees, but then how trees have intangibly affected our lives. And, some people get more, talk more about that than others, but everyone seems to have some, what's the word I'm looking for? A way to, can relate to the concept in some way, shape, or form. And I'm trying to think of one that stood out for me this past year. But I mean, we did 27 interviews, I think we said, Tony?
Yeah, I think we had a total of 27 episodes from last year. Some of those, no, those were the full hour-long interviews. There were some others, like we did the Sprouts at the ISA show, just sort of the short
Right.
things, almost kind of
Yeah.
experimental stuff. So with 27, so
Yeah.
I didn't total up the hours, but it's a lot of hours of of discussions. I think what kind of initially when we started doing the podcast, what really struck me was how many themes kept repeating, you know,
Mm.
like so many people's stories had a common thread to them, like how they got into tree work almost on chance or whim. And it really ended up being like, it put them on a better path than the path they were going. Or the people, like I remember talking with Wenda, where she
Right.
described when she's up on the top of that tree, doing this climbing
Yeah.
test that she was totally not really suited to do, but she didn't care how tough it was or how bad she was struggling. She just knew when she was at the top of that tree that this is what she was going to do. And to hear,
Yeah.
stories and themes like that repeated over and over really made me take a look at my own story, right, and see the themes in my story and in my life. Being second generation arborist, never having been outside of this industry to look in. It was a unique perspective for me to see that, because it allowed me to take a step back and for the first time in my life be able to look from the outside in to arboriculture and forestry.
Mm.
And I think that when I started to recognize those themes is when I really, and then the podcast and the way the discussions went really started to change on that. Yeah, there's a good bit of history, there's a good bit of, old equipment, reminiscing, I guess you'd say, which is always kind of fun. It's interesting to
Yeah.
see what we've
Yeah.
been and where we've been and where we're going. But it just, those themes were so common, and it was, I found that really, really interesting and intriguing to me to hear those stories and see those common threads.
I agree. And also, what I found interesting, which was a recurring type of sentiment, and maybe not always expressed on the show, but in the short talks after or before we would start recording, was how many people valued the concept of the historical aspect of it, or of the stories of where individuals had come from and their journey to the trees, sort of thing. I found that interesting, and quite common how it started very young initially for people. Their first memory goes back to childhood, long before they ever found themselves, also by chance, like you say, in it as an occupation type of thing, or where they're making a living at it. that was, I found that interesting as well, that there was that common thread, but that people liked hearing about others' journey in that way. I found interesting too, and that it was valued. And I felt what I found interesting about it is that we're in such an information age, where there's so easy to find resources, and yet here we are just sharing stories, and yet it seems to be valued. The age-old technique of just sitting around telling stories or talking. But I think COVID definitely has bolstered the whole audio format, or you don't have to be sitting at the same table in order to have these discussions and get meaning from them, right? Which we're capitalizing on or benefiting from as well.
Well, I think what COVID really did was it made us familiar with these tools that we use to record. Because you're sitting in your kitchen right now in Alberta, and I'm sitting in my office in Pennsylvania. And it's these tools have existed for a while. COVID has made them a lot better, but it made us much more aware of them. And I think for me, it showed me the power of them. That we can sit down and have these conversations with people or between ourselves and record it and then share it with other people. And there's value in that. And I've had a couple people come up to me when I've been out and about doing training and stuff that have listened to the podcast and said how much they've just appreciated hearing the other perspective. And it kind of reminded me, I remember, and we've talked a lot about the tree climbing competitions and the ITCC. And that makes sense too, because that's been the major tribal gathering for us. It makes sense that should come up. But it reminded me of the first couple of times I went to a tree climbing competition here at the chapter. It was eye-opening to me to realize that I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only person climbing trees, because I was really kind of working in a bubble. There was my older brother who owned the company. There was my friend and Ben's friend, Pete, who was my, climbing mentor. And that was kind of it, and there were other tree companies around, but they weren't, not to put them down, but they weren't working at the same level. They weren't doing them, they were topping, they were just, indiscriminate pruning and all those things. And my brother was really building a company based on modern arboricultural practices. And we were really the only ones doing it in the area. And it was nice to go to a tree climbing comp and meet other people that were doing it too. And I think that what people have described to me when they hear the podcast, it's like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. They see the common themes too. They thought that maybe they were the only person that chose arboriculture because it was just, they were going down a path that wasn't working out well for them, or maybe they weren't going down any path. Maybe they just needed a path, and trees kind of gave them that path and led to something. And you're right. It's amazing how many people, I wonder if, we talk to a lot of people that have been in this business for so long. I wonder if that's just because of the people we know. It's like, is there a recency bias? It's just all the people we know and talk to have been doing this work forever. So I think that it's interesting to share those stories. And, we've talked to so many people that I've known for 20 plus years, and I know most of their story, but it's amazing that I've never really heard them tell the story. Like it'll be coming up here, the interview we did with Jeff Dice. I mean, I knew about his dad and the accident and stuff, but I'd never heard Jeff tell the story before. And hearing Jeff tell the story was awesome.
That was powerful. I know that one was. That was a big one. That's definitely one you want to get everyone. Jeff Dice's interview is just a beautiful interview. It is. I had something I was going to say, but that one took me out. Now, remembering Jeff's interview was pretty powerful. It's what I was going to say is the people. I have tried in gathering guests. Obviously we lean on recommendations, and we do try to follow up on most all of those. That when people say, hey, this person would be a good, because we ask people who they might recommend. But I also like that we have what I like to think a bit of an eclectic group, or a varying background. And I think that's something that we want to continue to do in the future. And we're working on developing some social media pages. Right now we're looking at doing an Instagram page for those of you that are listening, that a way for people to make suggestions or to volunteer. I had a young lad that is a very young arborist, only 4 years now, and he's gotten into listening to some of the shows, some of the episodes. And, I know him, as well. And I said, well, you make a great guest. And he was flabbergasted. Why would you want me on the show? I'm a young artist. I don't know. I don't have any history. It's like, well, it's another perspective, and I just as far as listeners go, like part of my feeling for the show is to just give as broad of viewpoints as possible from different, we've had we've had consulting arborists to practicing working arborists to retired arborists to people even loosely related to arboriculture, and it's a theme I'd like to continue working on in the future. So, when you're thinking of people, if you want to get on the show, you got something you'd like to share, we're open. We're not, and we're very approachable. So I wanted to take time on this episode, Tony, to make that overture. And, there is just finding us on conventional means, but look forward to being able to have a social method of being able to tap into the episodes and into and to connect with us. And that's another something new, I guess, that we're branching into, Tony. And maybe you want to talk a little bit for those listeners to talk about about the Patreon page and our ideas there.
Yeah, like I said, Dwayne, I mean, we've been careful, mostly from my standpoint. I'm not a huge social media fan. It can be a very big energy and time vampire. I have to treat it very carefully. But I think the Instagram page will be an excellent way for people just to participate, to give us suggestions, feedback, comment. But the other thing we're looking to do more, and what we've found with this is through telling stories that we're really kind of starting to build a community. And we've had a lot of people say, you do such a great job with the podcast, or, how can we support you and how can you do it? So I did some searching around and so we opened up a Patreon page. You can find it. Just do a web search for patreon.com, Patreon, I believe is how they spell it. And you'll find it under TreeActions. And what it is it's an opportunity for, you can get, for free, you can get like 5-minute blurbs of all the episodes that come out on there. But if you, support the show, I think we're at like $3 now. We'll probably up that in a little bit. You can support the show for like $3 a month, and then you'll get access into the back where you'll get all the episodes a week early. We're going to develop some more stuff behind there, but mostly what you'll get is there's the ability back there to really build community and talk with us one-on-one. You're not going to catch me responding to people on social media. It's just not where I want to spend my time and energy. But if somebody's on the Patreon page, I'm more than happy to respond to them because it's a much more of a selective, captive audience. It's people that really want to be there. And it's just, I've learned that, we put time and energy into producing these shows, and it's a labor of love. And the podcast, we've talked about this before, Dwayne. I never wanted to be sponsored. I always wanted to be free. I don't want anybody other than you and I, deciding on who does what and who gets on the show and who doesn't. But there is, an expenditure. It does cost money to post these things, to run the software and stuff. And it's not terrible expensive. But mostly I wanted to open it up because I want people to be able to put their own energy into the show, whether it just be through feedback or it be through dollars and cents. Either way is fine. Mm-hmm. Because in the end, when you pay for something, it's just an energy exchange, right? That's all it is. The idea is not to turn the podcast into a multi-million-dollar, enterprise. I'm not trying to be the next Joe Rogan or Andrew Huberman in Huberman Lab. Just really looking a way to build community and to, maybe, allow people a chance to support something that they like. Because I've used Patreon with a couple creators and content makers that I've enjoyed, and I don't mind sending them, a couple dollars to help support what they got going on. So that's coming out. It's active and live now. There'll be a link in the show notes. There will be continually, and then I got a little blurb that's going in front of every episode to talk about just that for the first couple of weeks throughout the year. So just trying to grow, and ideally we can have a little bit of a budget, and then we could drive around and do some of this stuff live, which is always fun, right? The dabbling that we did at the Ontario ISA show, the little sprouts that we made, that was a lot of fun to do. It would be fun to do some more of that, because while this software works really well, it's still not quite the same as standing next to somebody and talking.
No. And we've also been asked, or comments have come up about using more than audio. And we have one guest that was on the show. He's one of our more listened to guest, Don Blair, has requested that or asked if it would be possible to do a video session where because he has stuff that he wants to show and he likes to use his hands and so that's something that we're working on as well. Now, Tony, is that something that is one of those like special things you get as being a part of the Patreon? Is that what we're thinking with that type of stuff?
Yeah, probably. I'm not real sure. I'm kind of winging it, playing it by ear now. It might be, I have a feeling that if we do something like that with Don, it's going to be beyond our usual, 70, 75 minutes time limit. So I'm not sure. Some of it might end up being on the Patreon page. Some of it will probably be on the regular podcast. I'm not quite sure how it's going to work yet, but I think, the main podcast itself, I fully intend to keep audio because I think it's more accessible to people. You can listen to it when you're driving down the road. I'm not opposed to doing audio. I still want to keep the main podcast, the one we put out every other week, to be audio, forward.
Just audio, yeah.
It's just, one, it's a little bit easier for me on a technical, less time consuming for me to edit. So, and then the other thing is it's more accessible and we don't really, our conversations thus far and the way we plan them out don't really require video. But if we do something special like with Don Blair, I mean, that would obviously, to get into some of the history and stuff, that would be something different. It's just always looking for new ideas and ways to change it up and keep it different. The podcast itself, the bi-weekly, will remain audio for a very long time.
Correct. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I wasn't suggesting that we're going to change TreeActions. TreeActions, it'll be our core modality and always remain that way. But adding, little special events here and there or special features once in a while, I think is what we're talking about. And it's kind of seeing how they go too. The whole thing has grown organically that way, and we've kind of responded to feedback and stimulus as it's occurred, and made adjustments as we've gone along. One thing I'd like to tell everybody that a feedback that we've gotten, some feedback I've gotten, which I've appreciated, is our introductory portion. And we were a bit better at it in the beginning, and I have to, Tony, I admit I dropped the ball on doing bios for every person, but a better job of at least our intro, and it's something I want to commit to for the next year, is just to have a bit more background, because I had one friend, a close friend, who's not an arborist at all, and he was really interested in this, but not being from the industry, the name didn't automatically conjure up a memory or per se. He wasn't he doesn't know. And then I got to thinking too, not every one of our listeners may know the history or how, where Don Blair came from, for example. Like to you and I, you say Don Blair, it's like saying Shigo. But I think we could do a better job in the very beginning of just telling who's on the show and where they come from, and because we kind of just get straight into it, with our sessions. But oh, my dog's barking. So I think that was something that came from feedback, and I've appreciated it because it makes sense, and it was two people, not just one, and so and we don't have to make it a big elaborate process, but if anyone's been wondered about that, or who is this person and who are they talking to, and we're going to try to improve on that as well. So that was something that's come out of feedback, and why I think we can just continue to grow and develop. I was maybe a little bit, Tony, on why we've never made it available. I know a lot of people have gone to search for it, and it's at this point it's still not really searchable. So just explain some of the reasons behind that.
Yeah, the way the podcast runs is it's what's called an unlisted podcast. So it's not it's like an unlisted phone number. Like it's not in the phone book. So when you go onto a podcast service and search for TreeActions, it won't show up. And it did that mainly, I think initially it was started to kind of keep it smaller on purpose because we didn't quite know where it was going to go. Didn't know what it was going to turn into and what we were going to use it for. So, and then it stayed that way because it occurred to me that it would have to, the only way it could spread that way would be like through word of mouth, one person telling another person or somebody talking to me, and then I tell them, and then they tell another person, which then occurred to me that that's kind of how trees grow and roots, and it was spreading like a root system would grow. And I thought there was kind of a poetic symmetry there called my artistic side was tweaked. So we've always kept it that way. I'm not entirely sure if we listed it, how much of a difference it would make. I mean, it's a fairly easy matter to list it on all the podcast servers. I don't know if I ever did it, it would just be to be more convenient for the listeners finding it. You can find it with the RSS link and put it on your podcast player, whatever podcast player you have. You just have to search for the URL. There's usually a function that says search for podcast with URL, and you enter that RSS link, or it's on the website. If you go to TreeActions, I think it's treeactions.fm.com, because we run it through the web, or maybe Transistor, don't remember. We run it through a site called Transistor, comes with a web page. So if you do Tree Actions search, all one word, it will come up pretty readily. There aren't too many Tree Actions out there. And then you can get it online as well too. And once again, you can get it through the Patreon page. If you're a member of Patreon, you can get for free, just like the first 5 minutes of each episode. And then if you get behind the paywall there, you can get the full episodes on there as well too. They're all currently audio now because I haven't produced any video content for it. I know.
Yeah, basically, the only thing people can't do is look up on Spotify or whatever these different apps are, and then find it in the listing. Right. That's really all we're talking about.
Yeah, and right? I mean that's a pretty easy fix. We could totally change that. And I don't, like I said, I don't think it would be that much of a difference in. Like I said, I think the main reason it was kept the way it is now is it just kind of tweaked my artistic, poetic sense more than anything. I just thought it was kind of cool, but I could certainly change it around if it makes it easier for people to find. You may get I just don't see too many people searching through, Apple Podcasts looking for an arborist. But what do I know? Who am I to say? So that's the story behind that. There was no grand plan other than it just seemed very synchronicity. Nice.
Well, I'm sitting there thinking about our listeners, and I thought maybe you and I could both regale each other and whoever's listening with the story of the first time the gravity of tree care came to bear. Maybe is the way I could put it. I remember, and this is long before I knew what I was doing, but I realized in this situation that there was a lot more going on. I wouldn't know, I don't know if I was smart enough for it to have scared me, but it was the beginning of my journey into realizing there's more I should probably know. And I'll go back to 1990. This would be 92. 1992, I believe. It might have been 91. And we were rigging down. So we're rigging, number one, this large cottonwood, and we were down to the big wood. There was only a 20-foot, 30-foot peg left, or statue. And it was getting into big wood. We had the big saw up, which didn't happen that often in the city of Calgary where I was working at the time. It wasn't that often that we would have to have a saw of that size in order to make the cuts. And it was in a rather affluent area along the river valley. They had a really nice backyard. And the whole idea was not to divot or dent the lawn. That was the thing. We don't want to dent the lawn. And I remember the foreman being really upset with the company owner because we had all winter just passed. It had just turned spring and everything had started to thaw. And then we had this removal that had been on the books for months. And he couldn't understand why in the hell we hadn't done the job when the ground was frozen. Because now we had to be extra careful, and we were rigging pieces because we couldn't just let them drop. And we had taken great care to protect the lawn at the base of the tree with tires covered with plywood. So we had tires arranged all around the base, and then put plywood on top of the tires, old tires, to create like a barrier cushion if a piece was to if pieces dropped, a big piece dropped, it wouldn't like punch a hole or leave a dent in the grass. We felt we were pretty up to date. I remember we had just received, not long before that, a brand new pulley, and it was a steel SMC pulley with beaner. Well, the beaner was definitely SMC. I'm not sure what the pulley was. I remember that it was a prusik minding pulley, which nobody knew what that was for, but that's what it was. It was steel, and it was rated very high. I remember the boss commenting on how strong it was, and the beaners were rated at 48 kN, and we extrapolated that to be some 7,000, some crazy number. And we looked at the piece of the boss would be like, there's no way. Like, look at the size. No matter how big of a chunk of wood you're going to take, this is way more than that. And but the pulley was less, but I don't know if it had a rating on it or not. And I also remember we always put the big sling, so we'd always take the big sling and we put that at the bottom of the tree. So we had two sides of slings, and the big one always went at the bottom because that was the one where you're grabbing the load. That's what you had to hold on to. So you wanted to make sure that was tough. And then the smaller sling would go at the top. And then we had a figure eight that's we used. We were really advanced. You see, we had moved beyond wrapping around the trunk. We were using this steel figure eight. And it was a locking eight, or what we would call a hearing eight. It had ears on it. And we would just load the system up, pull it tight. Someone would hold on, and you'd make your cut. We'd do a shallow notch and back cut it, and then just push, and it would just flump and shake, rattle, and roll. Like, get ready for the friggin' thwomp. And you'd sit there until everything stopped, which wouldn't take more than maybe 30 seconds, but those 30 seconds would just be intense, mostly for the person on the stick. And then once it all settled, we'd lower it to the ground. And that process just would intensify as you move your way down to the trunk. And we had gone far lower than we would normally go because we didn't want to damage the lawn. And I had to switch to a different hitch, and I was up there trying to tie a timber. I think he was trying to have me tie a timber hitch. And timber hitch, you talked, Tony, about the way of tying it with Norm Holt showed you with the extra half, because it doesn't. Well, mine kept falling apart. And I was up there, and I was a relatively new climber, so I was getting intimidated by the guys on the ground, and the foreman particularly. Just get it tied on there. Finally, he reached the point of breaking. He said, "Get down, I'll do it myself," which I gladly said, "Fine, I bailed." Down I came, and he went on up, and he tied it all up, and I think we only were going to do two more pieces. So this was a pretty big chunk. And I'll never forget it. I was just sort of standing observing because I had been in the tree and I was kind of resting and, feeling shame. I was like in the penalty box, And there's a guy on the rope holding it, and he had holding it fast. And we had a 3/8 line that was just could barely fit into the pulley. Like it was too big. There's no way it fit properly into the gusset of the sheave. I look back on it, just every possible thing was incorrect. And then snubbing it off, locking it off, taking the shock, and then lowering it down. So the ground guy's holding onto the rope. The foreman's up there, cuts it, releases it. And I'll never forget it. It just splat, hit the ground. It's like he hadn't tied it on, but I'd watched him tie it on, but it hit and fell so quickly, it was as if it wasn't tied on, and I couldn't understand. I'm sitting there looking, wondering what just happened, and it was no sooner did I think that than the groundy holding the rope screams and lets go of the rope, but it already had happened. His reaction time wasn't even fast enough, and the rope had ripped through and burned right through his gloves and burned his skin. And the piece is laying on the ground, and I look up the tree, and hanging off the sling is this steel rescue carabiner that was rated for 48 kilonewtons, and it is 5 times its normal length. Like it's a foot and a half long, and the metal is maybe half the thickness of a pencil. Like it's extremely thin, and it's just swinging there. And I noticed at the base is the pulley's there, and it's just stretched and warped, but it didn't break. But the carabiner is just partially hanging in the sling, and most of it's gone. We never did find any piece of it. And I remember asking, well, we took the piece, and then the foreman comes down on the tree and notches it and just drops it and puts a big old fat dent in the lawn. Just says, screw it, we're done. I'm sick of this. And when we proceeded to haul out logs, and I think we had to go back to finish the next day and everything. But I remember going back to the shop saying, what the heck, boss? And with genuine curiosity and please teach me how this happened. And it was just basically, you guys took too big of pieces, ridiculous. You guys, and it was just thrown in the garbage. It didn't even, I wish I would have never given it back to him, the broken beaner, because it was astonishing how, and it was warm when it came. This was minutes later still, it was still hot. I remember. So that was the first time. And it still took many years. It was until I met Pete Donzelli that I really started being educated about what forces can be generated in rigging. And I don't know if anyone ever has experienced anything being broken, but I think it's a story that I haven't told in a long time. And I thought, maybe some people might learn from it, might benefit from it. And one of the learnings I got out of it now, and that's why I realized putting the big sling at the top is completely wrong, because it's always twice the load due to the rigging point. So the big sling should always go at the top. You shouldn't snub it off. You should not ever. It's not a good way to. It isn't managing friction at all, or shock load. It's just enduring shock load till it's over. And I don't know how many people still do it like that out there. I have a feeling, Tony, a lot of people still do that and think that that's just part of rigging. And I thought, as basic of a lesson as it might seem to be, maybe it's something I'd talk about today. And I have one other story to back that one up that almost killed me, but we'll save that one for another time. But do you have a story where you realized, holy shit, something's going on here that's bigger and badder than I realized?
No, not really to that extent. I was always fortunate, being second generation. I didn't want to be an arborist, so I tried not to be an arborist. So as soon as I graduated from high school, I enlisted in the Army and left home and tried to get as far away from New Holland, Pennsylvania as I could. And I did a pretty good job. Ended up in Europe for a couple of years and around. But so while I was exposed to arboriculture, it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And then when I got back out of the Army, my brother had started the tree company, but I really just helped him out. One, I kind of needed some beer money, and two, he needed help. But they didn't let me really do anything except run a rake for the longest time.
Okay.
And then I would I would lower a little bit. And occasionally I would steal someone's saddle when they weren't looking and climb a small tree and get yelled at, because guilt and shame are training techniques with the family business. And I putted around like that for the longest time. But then it became apparent that I was fairly decent at the work. I had some aptitude for doing it, whether just because, I'd been exposed to it forever. And I mean, I knew the basis of a climbing system. Like my dad taught me how to climb on a taunt line and a butt strap saddle when I was 13, so I knew it. I knew the process of it. And getting out of the military, I was fairly strong, I was fairly fit, so I could do it. And so I was fortunate in the fact that I kind of coasted into it. It got to the point where I was 28 years old, and, I'm like, I have to make decisions in life. Like, I got to find something. I can't just keep wandering around doing nothing. I got to find a path to go down. And I decided that it would be arboriculture. I look back on it now and know that a big part of my decision was to help my brother out. And I think a big part of the decision for me was, at that point in my life, on a personal level, I really needed a tribe. I was a couple years out of the military, and I missed the tribe. Like, if you fit in the service, you know exactly what I mean. But when you live with a group of guys, for me, it was specifically guys because we were a combat forward unit. We did everything together. We ate together. We went out at night together. I lived in a barracks with 4 to 6 roommates. Hell, we took shits together. So when we were in the field, it's just what you did, right? Because you didn't go anywhere by yourself. So when I got out of the military, I think that's what really affected me was that loss of tribe. And I found that tribe in arboriculture. So having said that as a corollary, I kind of drifted into it, made the decision. And at that point, we were doing very much the same thing. We had, we were high tech. We had a figure 8 that we were lowering off of, and we used 2 carabiners. They weren't locking carabiners by any stretch of the imagination. They were the big kind of teardrop with the eye shape at the bottom ones you can still get at like Home Depot, but you had to use 2 of them, and you opposed the gates, right, so that it wouldn't slip off. And we still have the figure 8. It's got like these 2 millimeter grooves worn into it. It hangs on the wall in the shop. And that was, but at that point, because it became obvious that I was going to stay more involved with the business, my brother really started investing time and energy and sending me to training courses and getting me to know. So I did the Arbor Master courses and, met, of course, Scott, and then through him would have met Norm and got a porter wrap, and so there wasn't, I've had moments in my career. I would have to say my story is almost a little opposite. Those moments like that were because I was getting good training and I went over my skill set or my head because I thought I knew more than I did. Right. Or I would get I remember the first time I learned how to make a bore cut in the tree, right? Like, oh, this is awesome. You can set your hinge and you can bore cut it and you can cut from the back. It's great. And I'm doing that, but I forgot to remove my tie-in point from the piece I was cutting. And it's a sobering thing when you see the top going and you're like, oh, that cut's awesome. And then your climbing line goes slack and you're like, oh shit. Luckily, it was a very small tree because they didn't allow me in very big trees. And the top really hit the ground before it loaded my system. But had I not put my lanyard on, and the only reason I put my lanyard on was quite honestly, Rip told me to put my lanyard on when I did the training with him. So I put my lanyard on because if Rip tells me to do it, I'll do it. Seems fair enough to me. That's what kept me from getting pulled out of the tree. I don't think it would have been a fatal accident. And I was still in my 20s, so I would have bounced pretty hard on that one. I think I would have made it through, but it was definitely one of those where I'm like, I think I need to slow up a little bit here. Maybe take a step back. And so I did. Mine was almost the opposite, right? I started to learn these things and they distracted me a little bit. Right. I got so wrapped up in a new technique, I forgot the big picture. But it was fortunate. I have plenty of stories.
That's a good way to put it. Fortunate. It's life, man. Like, I think, I don't know if it happens to everybody, but I've done that. I didn't cut mine. I didn't finish to cut, but I started, and I hadn't even bore cut it. But I was still tied in, and I was back cutting it, and I don't know why I stopped, but I was 3/4 of the way through, just going away, but it hadn't started to hinge yet, and there was just a rope in it. It wasn't being rigged. It was just sending it. And I stopped. I don't know why. I just stopped. And the saw, I paused. And in that pause, I noticed, I repositioned, I think, a little bit. And then I realized, oh shit, I'm still fully tied in completely to the very piece that I'm cutting. And, I was able to stop the saw, and I'm well through this. Like, it's not, it's almost going, but it's not quite going. Like, it's not. It needs another half a second on the saw, and it's going to start to hinge. But it isn't yet. But it's close, And like taking the rope out, I had to be ginger because I thought, it might create enough of a situation, just if you have too much friction, pulling it out might send it, but I was able to pull it out without anyone even realizing what had happened. And it just makes you go like, what? Well, I should, at the time, you're just kind of, well, that was cool. Oh, wow. And you realize that it was close and everything, but now I look back on it and wonder what made it different for me than the people that hasn't happened to, other than I think of the word luck, fate, or gift or blessing, but I can't take credit. Like you think about it. From that point forward, I was on a borrowed plan. I was gifted a chance because that could have been curtains. Like that could have been my one. And everything that's happened after that has been a gift. And I think when you can grasp onto that, and I mean, I could count several more times in different scenarios. I maybe didn't do that again, but I've had other ones where it's like, not always in trees. I've had a couple of vehicle incidents, where it's like, man, I can't explain why, but it didn't happen to me that time. It wasn't, you hear it wasn't my time. It wasn't this. And I don't think that that's the big deal. It's not about getting caught up in the is it odd or is it God conversation. It's about appreciating, and I think those lessons are there to show us the gift of life and the preciousness of it, and it's the same for everybody. And the whole how easy it is to judge someone, say, "Oh, what kind of idiot would do that?" Well, I think any arborist that has paid the ultimate price through an error in judgment or a simple mistake, I could have just as easily done myself, 100%. I don't think there's any one of them, whether they've been trained or not, that just simple errors in this industry just can have such literally fatal consequences. And I think it's important that we all recognize that, and that none of us are above it. I think there's something when you reach the ability to be able to realize it. I think it's important. I don't know. Am I making sense
Yeah.
here? I feel like I'm rambling.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I think that we all know it's better. It's every day. It's better to be lucky than good. Just the way the universe works. Just the way it works. But when you can't realize, luck is not a strategy, right? And when you do have those lucky moments, it's very important to sit down and take a look and understand for what it is, right? And I know that when that incident had happened to me, it was sobering, right? It slowed me down a lot. It made me pay a lot more attention to what I was doing and stay a lot more focused. And to me at that point, tree work was kind of a big puzzle I was putting together. But I realized at that point that it was a very serious puzzle, that if the pieces don't go together right, something terrible could happen. And like I said, fortunately for me, it was just fortune, luck, call it whatever you want, like I said. But you're true, it's maybe every day after that was gifted. But I had plenty of moments in my life before that. So it was a gift from a gift from a gift from out of the tree work.
Well, yeah.
But I had a really good grounding myself to appreciate the value of life at that point in my life anyway, through other experiences. But that was definitely, for me, it made me, I think in the end, it set me on the path to be a trainer. I think experiences like that. So, and I think it improved my skills as a trainer because, I'm not telling these stories or training these skills with impunity. I've screwed this shit up too. Like I said, I've been fortunate. I've had really good teachers, really good mentors, really good mentors over my years as an arborist, but that doesn't mean I've worked with impunity. Right. And appreciating those things and understanding that, you have to accept a certain amount of responsibility for your actions is important.
Well, and I think you said it best with it's not the escaping death, but celebrating life. That you've been given the opportunity to continue learning. And death is an inevitability for us all. And that's something else. I don't know if this is the time or place, but like it's simply part of the journey. It's an inevitability, and it's not it's not something we seek to happen prematurely, but in its time, all things do happen, right? And in the tree care industry, you're faced with it somewhat. Like when I think back to when Peter died and was killed, I certainly don't think that was his time, but at the same time, 7 guys died that week, 3 of which doing the same top removal that Peter was doing on the same type of tree. Like, were they better than us? Were they did they make mistakes that we wouldn't make? I don't. You know, it's like Stanley wrote the song "The Perfect Tree" in honor of Pete's fatality, and you know, he says there is no rhyme or reason to the question why. I guess it was just meant to be, and you know, there isn't it being even able to accept our journey as such as when it is what it is, and others we don't know. I don't know why it had to be. I don't know that it you know it was so many factors came together that day. It's almost like how it was like it was meant to be. That's what Stanley talks about. Like why I don't know, but you know why are we so? We spend a lot of time avoiding that inevitability of life. You know, either it be through diet, exercise, and just plain old fear, worry. But you know, I certainly you know there's a difference between that and recklessly heading in that direction. I think, but having a place to accept it from a place of I don't know what. Um, it's an interesting concept though, and yeah. But I really wanted to say, as encourage people out there, like always try to learn and try never to judge if possible. And I hate to say the word never because we all, I certainly am capable of it and do it and try not to though is because it closes the mind to learning. I think you know if you think it couldn't happen to you, you've just missed an opportunity to learn. And you know nobody sets out to leave the rope in the top and do the back cut that morning. You know, and you've talked about that before, Tony. And you know, to some you break your back, and to some you get in the hospital, to some you get in the coffin, and to some you don't even get injured. You know, the tree was too short. Why? You know, there's no. But to think that you couldn't have done it, to think that it couldn't happen, I think that's where the real mistake gets made personally. And being honest with what you've done and willing to learn and open minded to what causes things and what we can learn from, I think is pretty key.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's like I said, you know, death is inevitable, but I look at it from there's a span of life and then there's a span of living, right? Or so there's the time you live and then the quality with which you live. I think for most people, the span of life, how long you actually live, it might be a little predetermined, maybe by genetics, maybe by a lot of different things. I think the point
Right.
is to make the quality of the life as best as possible within that span. So the best way to go out is you're at full bore and then you're gone, right? Blink out like a shooting star. But you know, to live right to that end, not that kind of slow decline down. And that's not to advocate, that's not to go big or go home. I think the way that's accomplished is through exactly what you were saying, right? Taking an honest look at what you do in life and the risks you take and why you take them. You know, it occurred to me years ago that knowingly doing something unsafe is probably the most selfish thing you could possibly do, right? Because if you don't, I don't want to wear that hard hat because it's hot and it's uncomfortable, and you knowingly don't wear that hard hat and then get hit on the head and die, you don't pay. Well, ultimately you pay the price, but everyone else around you pays, right? And I mean, for me, there was a certain point in my life because of my life experiences. You know, it's the old George Thorogood song. I'm just 22 and I don't mind dying. Nothing was going to be lost, right? You know, a beat up pickup truck, a 9mm handgun, and a 6-pack of warm beer. It's all I had to my name. You know, so it wasn't putting a lot on the line when I was going out and doing stupid shit. But as you get a little older and you start to appreciate things a little more, that quality of life and that span of life becomes more valuable. So understanding that, and you know, I think we're talking a lot about mortality here too, just because of, you know, with Norm passing, you know, our good friend Norm Hall passing, and it's funny how the universe or whatever you say puts things in your way. I texted you the other day. I was working last week with the crew and I ended up on the job site where I remember working there the day I found out that my dad passed away. And there's so many memories, good and bad, that are tied up to tree jobs with me, right? I can remember where I was. I
Wow.
can remember I was working in the shop on a rain day when I heard about Peter's accident. Um, I can remember what I was doing. There's so many I remember the tree jobs I was working on when you know, when my niece was born, or when my nieces and nephews were born. I remember where I was working and what I was doing when I got that phone call. We didn't have a lot of cell phones far enough back then, but you get back to the office and
Yeah.
you get the news, and it's like,
Yeah.
and it's an interesting way to look at it. Like, trees are markers in my life for the last 30 some years. Like, they're signposts. Different trees or different jobs I've worked on, and different things I've made decisions in trees, because you're up there working and pruning or something, and you just kind of get a think on or something. And I've made some pretty profound life decisions in the top of a tree, about the course of my life and how it was going to go and what I do with my family and those types of things. So it's a unique perspective. It took a while to get there and appreciate it. And maybe other people have those types of markers in their life. I don't know, but I think arborists all have trees for markers and waypoints. And I think when, like with Norm passing, and then just thinking about these things, it kind of comes back around, and it's good. It's not that I'm dwelling on it and everything's depressed, but it's good to think about your own mortality, right? It's good to think those. When we were talking with Scott the other night, I said, a mentor arborist of mine, Bruce Samaria, worked for Davy Tree for many, many years, and was a man that in his personal life had dealt with a great deal of tragedy, his wife passing away and things. And he told me once, he said, Tony, don't leave it unsaid, don't leave it undone. If it's important, don't leave it unsaid, don't leave it undone. And it's a fine piece of advice, and I've used that piece of advice as a motivation for me to be like, yeah, this isn't going to be a great conversation, or this isn't going to be an easy conversation, but I need to have it, because you don't know. Right? You just don't know, right? It's far better to be uncomfortable in the moment than to span it out for a long time. And it's to bring it back around to the podcast, listening to these stories of many of these people I've known that have been, some of them are brand new to me, but the majority of them I've known for a while, and some of them on a personal level, not only in the business and as a work colleague, but as a personal friend. But to hear their stories and to see those similarities it's made me realize that I think I was drawn to training. I always thought I was drawn to training because I love to learn. And that's true. I do love to learn new things. But I think ultimately I was drawn to training because I love to tell stories. And I never saw training as storytelling until we started to do this podcast. And I realized that when I step in front of a group of people and I'm teaching them basic chainsaw use, I'm just telling stories that I heard from you. I heard from Scott. I heard from Norm. I heard from Bruce. I'm just retelling the stories that they told me, and I'm throwing some of my own in there. And my hope is that somebody that was a student of mine someday will start to tell those stories of Norm and Bruce and Dwayne and Scott and Tony. And then that will continue on. And I think it will, because, in the end, I love to tell stories. And that's been the driving force for a lot of my creative activities, a lot of my personal life. And I think that's what drew me to training, was the ability to tell stories. And I never realized it until we started to do this podcast.
Well, there's a saying that some of the world's greatest teachers told stories, and it is, I believe, it's considered the original form of education. It's how it all started. It's still the most common medium, that the first way you start to learn things is through stories, particularly lesson things, like life lesson type things. It's almost in all cultures it connects to a story, and it's fascinating. Storytelling, yes, teaching and storytelling. There you go. Well, I hope that our our solo podcast to kick off 2024 has been interesting, folks. Tony and I obviously normally have a guest, and we decided to just have a chat together with everyone, and this has been it. And I just want to say that any of you that have been listening diligently, we appreciate your you listening to us, and we're going to continue having fun and doing what we do, and we hope that it will land where it lands for people. And I just want to give people the 100%. I'm not the word is here, but just if it resonates, great. If it resonates, great. If it doesn't, great. Take what works. Take the blow the chaff away and take the kernels that apply to you, or file it away. Maybe one day you can go back and listen to an episode that confused you, or whatever. It's not a I and if we've crossed any lines or anything over the last season, I don't know of anything specifically, and I haven't heard anything, but we have the best intentions, and our motives are pure in the delivery of this, and the hope that it can simply serve as a way to improve this human forest that we all are part of, and that's our goal. And our goal is that we are somehow helping with the thrival, not necessarily survival. My son was doing a talk, and he said he found a Schigel quote that said, "Survival is living in an environment where everything is trying to kill you, and thriving is not. Thriving is living where things are going well." And he was talking specifically about the plight of urban trees, and I found it quite fascinating.
Yeah, no, I can't echo that enough. I'm deeply appreciative for everybody that listens to the podcast and has listened. It's been an enormous creative outlet for me to do. From a technical standpoint, I love to do that type of work, and it's been very satisfying. But like I said, just sharing those stories is important. And the people that have come up to me in my travels that I've been around, that have listened to the podcast, that have given me, excellent feedback, it just means the world to me. I can't express how much that is. And, I would encourage everybody to, spread the word some more. Maybe we'll list the podcast so it becomes easier for people to find if they want. But I think, we do have some, like I said, we're looking to do new and different things. As always, we're always open to suggestions. So we'll have the Instagram page out there soon. We'll use that as pressure for Dwayne to get that up and running. And there's a Patreon page. Will be, we're scheduled to be at the Arbor Expo, which is the end of March in Edison, New Jersey, at a trade show. I think we'll be doing some live stuff there. I'll be at the Ontario ISA show, presenting again this year. That's in February, end of February. I'm going to say 21st, 22nd, 23rd of February, presenting there. Perhaps Dwayne will be there too, like we did last year. We'll see, but we will be getting out and around. We like doing the live stuff is always fun. That's kind of the icing on the cake, for all of it. Right. And to really meet people and to sit down and chat with them is awesome.
It is. Well, Tony, I want to thank you for all your hard work and for your, it was your encouragement and reminding me that we're running low on episodes, and there's couldn't have done it without you. Is an understatement, and so thanks for all you do to keep this thing going, and it's been a blast, and I just look forward to another season of wherever it takes us.
Yep. Yeah, well, you're welcome, and thank you for being the extrovert to my introvert in this partnership, because I couldn't do it without you either. It has been fun. I do look forward to where it'll go in the new year, and as these things go on, and I think it's going to just get better and better.
Yes, I agree. Well, everyone, this is Dwayne Newstater and
Tony Tressel,
wishing you a happy 2024 and a safe journey through this human forest. Until next time.
We'll
see ya.